We all heard the news yesterday that maybe was surprising to some, but probably wasn't to most others and really shouldn't be surprising, is that the Carolina Panthers were tired of trying to figure out what Cam Newton's status was. He wasn't progressing like they felt he should have in rehab, and they made the decision to put him on season-ending injured reserve. So that means Cam Newton's 2019 season is over, which of course now is going to bring up the very real and important discussions in the months to come about whether or not Cam Newton's time in Carolina is at a close. And I understand for a lot of Panthers fans that this is not the most comfortable conversation for you because Cam Newton has been the face of your franchise since he was taken with the top overall pick in 2011. This entire decade, pretty much, you've associated your franchise with the young quarterback, Cam Newton. And this is a guy, he's been there now 9 years, 4 playoff appearances, 3-time Pro Bowler, MVP season in 2015, led your team to a Super Bowl appearance. You know, you look at him, third all time in quarterback rushing yards. You go on and on and on. And just in general, he's been that dude. He's been the man for your organization. And it's tough to think about something like that potentially ending, and not just ending, but ending in this type of way or fashion at this period in time. This isn't how you would want the Cam Newton era to end in Carolina. You want more. And you feel like he deserves more too. And there definitely is something to that. But here is the reality. Cam Newton is going to be 31 years old next year, coming off of another significant injury, whereas he had the shoulder injury in 2018 that clearly impacted his play. You could say especially his velocity, his arm strength, that he had off-season surgery on, that you could look at him early on in 2019 and it didn't look right. Now you've got the Liz Frank foot injury. Like, now you got a guy with his size profile, 6'5", 260-ish plus pounds. These guys start to get to a certain point, whether it be quarterback or other positions, he's already really big for his position as it is. Now you're talking about shoulder injuries and you're talking about foot injuries, and you really start to wonder if his body is coming apart due to the years of wear and tear and abuse on his body. And it's one of those things the reality comes down to. He's carrying a $21+ million cap hit next year. Do you want to take the chance of investing $21 million of your salary cap into a quarterback who might not be able to make it through an entire season, might not play much of the season, or even if he does, you don't really know what level of effectiveness he's even going to have? It seems to be an incredible risk, and you just don't really know if it's worth it. And this could be one of these situations where it could potentially be better, I guess you would say, to end it a year early than a year too late. And I look at that, the situations I could think of back in the day, the Minnesota Vikings with Dante Culpepper, when he tore his ACL, I believe it was. He left in free agency, went to the Dolphins. The Vikings didn't retain him. Dante Culpepper, just after one ACL tear. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm just saying, compared to Cam Newton, who's had injuries down with his foot that are serious, and his throwing shoulder, for God's sakes, which you would think to a quarterback would be more important than the knee, even to mobile quarterbacks like Dante Culpepper and Cam Newton. Culpepper was washed up after that point. You could say that was going to Miami and playing under Saban, doesn't matter. Bottom line is he was never the same player again. You can look at Tennessee, and in 2005 when they drafted Vince Young, 3rd overall, that also marked Steve McNair's last season there, and he eventually went on to Baltimore. And Steve McNair could still play a little bit, but it was better in both of those cases to do it a year too early as opposed to a year too late. And you're talking about a quarterback who's never been the most proficient passer in and of himself. Now you're dealing with some durability concerns. He's north of age 30. How much is he going to really progress, and how much could you really expect him to maintain physically that kind of running style that he's had that's made him his most successful in his career as he gets older? How much can you really expect that? I mean, these are very valid and fair questions. And if you look at the way the Panthers are trending right now, they're in the playoff mix with freaking Kyle Allen as their starter? How much better would this team really be with Cam Newton even if Cam was healthy? And if that's the case, is it really worth paying Cam Newton $21 million next year to give you a similar level of production to Kyle Allen? And while that's going to seem blasphemous to Panther fans, just think about it for a second. Is it really that much of a difference? And is there that much of a difference because you love Cam and you're a big fan of Cam? Or is there that much of a difference in actual reality? I think it is more of the former than it is the latter. So you really have two choices if you're the Panthers. You either A, cut or trade him, or B, you keep him and play out the string of his contract in his last year in 2020 and you see what happens. Now the first option has a lot of appeal in this sense, is that it is better to move on a year too early than a year too late. Your team is already successful without him. How much more successful are they going to be with him? And frankly, ever since that Super Bowl season in 2015, when they got there and he kind of disappointed in the big game, he never really truly has been the same guy. It's just there's been a different mystique. There's been a different thing about him. It's just truly not the same. And while the Panthers already appear to have a good amount of salary cap space heading into next offseason, about $40 million ish, give or take, you can get out of Cam Newton's $20+ million contract next year with only taking on a $2 million cap hit. So if you want to remake that team around a younger quarterback that carries a much lower cap figure, whether that be Kyle Allen or somebody else, you can cut Cam Newton, give yourself a little bit north of $60 million in cap space. Like, that's incredibly appealing. And do you want to be the team that brings back Cam Newton, pays him $21 million, and then he goes out there and he's ineffective? Do you want to go out there and put him in a situation where fans are booing him and fans are calling for him to be replaced? Like, I know at the end of the day, some of the politics of how the fans perceive and how a city perceives a team and their decisions shouldn't really matter that much, but there is something to be said about if you're the organization. Would you be doing him a disservice for all that he's done for your team, your city, the franchise, what have you, by putting him into a situation where he's stuck around too long and he's hated? Or not hated, but he gets booed, and people are disappointed, and those are the lingering memories that they have of Cameron Newton. Or do you move on? Now, granted, I don't anticipate there being a ton of trade market there for a guy with a couple of notable injuries over the past 2 seasons. I can't imagine that there's going to be much of a trade market. Maybe a mid-round pick, you're probably going to be more easily able to just cut him. Because I don't know if you're going to get in return in a trade what you think you're going to get, which means that the deal doesn't really work that well. Maybe it's better to play the bad guy so that way the fans can be mad at you instead of the fans being mad at Cam. I don't know how much sense that really makes, but just something to think about. Just something to think about. Like I think about it with my Bears, with Urlacher and Briggs. Those guys still had something left. Each of them in their situation should have been back for another season or two. Douchebag GM Phil Emery couldn't wait to get rid of both of them. And we saw how that worked out. But ultimately, maybe there was something to the fact that those guys were done when they still had a little something left in the tank. And I can remember the good times and the good memories from them. And I don't have to remember them as washed up has-beens at the end of their career. I can hate Phil Emery for the decisions that he made, not on Urlacher or Briggs for playing 1 or 2 seasons too long. Maybe that doesn't make sense to any of you, but it kind of makes sense to me. On the flip side of this, I could say that maybe they should keep him. His $21 million cap figure for a franchise-level starting quarterback, if he played at that level again in 2020, is a hell of a bargain. When you got guys getting $30, $33, $35 million a year that are lesser players that will never measure up to close to what Cam Newton has meant to the Carolina Panthers and the level of player he's been as a quarterback in the National Football League. Like, if you have any indication that he's healthy, then by God, you want to at least write out the string in his contract, because that's not really a bad deal at all. Like, in the grand scheme of things, Cam Newton's 2020 contract, if he's healthy, is a really, really good one. And assuming he wouldn't go into the offseason trying to hold out for more money and demand a new contract, like, you'd almost be a fool if you had an inclination that Cam Newton could be that healthy guy again, to at least not ride out the string with him in 2020. And then you think about it. Do you really have that much confidence in Kyle Allen or anybody else going forward to be that dude to a similar level that Cam Newton is? Like, if you're going to move on from Cam Newton, you must really, really, really be confident that whoever you have in mind is going to be able to be that dude, maybe in a different way, mind you, but be that dude to a certain level. Because if not, it is something that is going to impact your franchise, your organization negatively for years, and people are never, ever going to forgive you for it. And even when you talk about Cam Newton and all he's meant to the organization, do you really want to cut him and get nothing back in return? Or do you want to trade him for potentially like a third or fourth round pick? Do you really feel like you're getting much value back for a guy that has meant so much to your franchise over the course of this decade? Yeah. Ugh. I mean, I just don't know. If he can be that dude, that cap figure is not that restrictive. And you will still have cap space. Like the Panthers are in a position where they're paying a quarterback below market money right now, and they have cap space. You really need to rock the boat there. The simple answer is, I don't know. A big part of me right now, though, leans towards, for the Panthers, for the sake of Cam, for the sake of the fans, for the sake of everybody involved, that this does need to be the end. Because I ultimately feel like it is better to be a year early than a year too late. Because even if you bring back Cam Newton for 2020, there's no guarantee you're going to keep him around long term. So then what? You kick the can down the road of trying to figure out your long-term life after Cam options? Why not start that ball rolling now? And your team is already successful this year. And this organization has moved on from other great players like Julius Peppers and Steve Smith and turned out just fine. And Cam Newton, as good as he has been, is not the same level of player at his position that Steve Smith was at his position or Julius Peppers certainly was at his. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, they weren't quarterbacks, I grant you, but they were both better players at what they do than what Cam Newton has been. So if they can get by and move on with life after those two guys, then they most certainly can. Same thing with Josh Norman. They most certainly can with Cam Newton. And I think this season, if anything else, proves that for the Panthers, their fans, the organization, when it comes to Cam Newton, it's got to be thanks for the memories and good luck to you, but you got to go get a starting job somewhere else because it's not in the long-term interest of this organization to continue this relationship.